The Antichrist. The question has long been asked, who is the Antichrist? Was it Antiochus Epiphanes? Is it someone who will come in the future? Is it someone who will sit in the third temple of Israel? How can we know who the Antichrist is? To find out, we have to go to the Bible, the book of Daniel. We've already studied Daniel 2, 7, and part of 8. This video is a continuation of Daniel 8. So if you haven't seen the previous videos, make sure you watch them because they complement each other. Let's do a quick review. Daniel 2 talks about the statue of Nebuchadnezzar. The statue represents world empires that were to come. It was a timeline of kingdoms. Daniel 7 talks about the same prophecy, but it uses beasts. Now we are in Daniel 8, where the ram, the goat, and the little horn are used. Remember that these three chapters relate the same prophecy. God uses a system called repeat and enlarge. What is repeat and enlarge? It's basically this: God repeats and expands. He repeats the same prophecy and expands it. Now, remember that in Daniel 8, it starts with the ram, one horn larger than the other. Then comes the goat with a notable horn that destroys the ram. And on the head of the goat, the notable horn is broken and the four horns come out. Then a little horn comes out. The ram is Medo-Persia, the goat is Greece, and the little horn is Rome. We already studied all of this in the previous video. But now we continue with the identity of this little horn of Daniel 8. What does the little horn have to do with the Antichrist? Well, the Bible tells us that a power will come before the second coming of Christ. The Bible tells us that this little horn will be present in the last days. The Antichrist will be an identity that will be present before the coming of Christ. Paul writes about the man of lawlessness that would come before the return of Christ. So the Antichrist is the little horn and the man of lawlessness, said by Paul. That being said, let's see who the Antichrist really is. Daniel 8 speaks of the little horn like this: and out of one of them came a little horn which grew exceedingly great towards the south, towards the east, and towards the glorious land. Here it is speaking of imperial Rome and its conquests. The Romans came from the west and conquered to the south in Egypt, to the east towards Greece, Asia Minor, and Syria, and the glorious land, Jerusalem. Wait, what? You just said that the little horn is the Antichrist, and now you say that it is the Roman Empire? I know, the little horn has two phases. It is still Rome, but it changes form. It has two phases. Well, if you say so. I'm not the one saying it. The Bible explains it. Look at this. And it grew up to the host of heaven, and it cast down some of the hosts and some of the stars to the ground and trampled them. Here it is no longer talking about something that the Roman Empire did. This is no longer little. This is already spiritual. Here we see that in this verse a transition occurs. Look at what verse 11 says. He even exalted himself as high as the prince of the host, and by him the daily sacrifices were taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. Once again, we see that it is no longer talking about imperial Rome, but a different Rome, an ecclesiastical Rome. What do I mean by this? Well, let us look at the characteristics that the Bible presents to us, and let us identify who this power is. What? The Antichrist is already here? Yes, Paul said in 2 Thessalonians 2:7, for the mystery of lawlessness is already at work. Only he who now restrains will do so until he is taken out of the way. In Paul's day, the Antichrist was already about to come. In Daniel 7, we saw the characteristics of the little horn. We're going to do it one more time with this chapter. We already read Daniel 8 verse 10-11. So number 1, he exalts himself against the host army of heaven and tramples the stars. He even exalts himself against the prince of the hosts. The 25th of the same chapter says, and he shall rise up against the prince of princes. Then 2, he shall rise against the prince of princes. Number 3, the daily is taken away, and the place of his sanctuary is cast down. Verse 12 says, and because of transgression. Then 4 is that he commits transgression. It goes on to say, an army was given over. Then number 5 is that an army was given over to oppose the daily sacrifices. Number 6 is that the daily sacrifices are opposed, and he casts down the truth to the ground. Number 7 is that he casts down the truth to the ground. 25 says, through his cunning he shall cause the seat to prosper under his rule. Number 8 is that through his cunning he causes the seat. 23 says, who understands sinister schemes. 9 understands, does sinister schemes. Verse 12 says, he did all this and prospered. Number 10 is that he does whatever he wants and prospers, and he shall prosper and thrive. He shall destroy the mighty. 11 is that he does whatever he wants and destroys the mighty. And lastly, verse 25 says, through his cunning. So 12, it is cunning. Now, we have 12 characteristics about this horn. It is almost the same as the horn in Daniel 7. Is it a coincidence that both chapters 7 and 8 talk about a horn that exalts itself and causes great harm? Because so far we have seen that Daniel 2, 7, and 8 are the same prophecy. Now, there is an identity that comes close to these characteristics. As I said in my previous video, I do not say this to attack anyone, but this power is the Antichrist because the Bible proves it. The Antichrist is the papacy of the Roman Catholic Church. I am not talking about the people in this organization, but about the system. Only the system. Why is it not Antiochus Epiphanes? The Catholic priests, Jesuits, made two prophetic interpretations, the futurist and preterist interpretation. They did this to divert from the church being identified as the Antichrist. These two theories have been accepted by the evangelical world. Daniel 8:9-23 explains that the little horn comes out at the end of the reign of the 4 Greek horns. That is, the Greek reign has to end, and then comes the little horn. Antiochus was just another king of the Greek dynasty of General Seleucus. He was part of the 4 horns. The second reason is that this little horn had to grow greatly and surpass the previous empires, Persia and Greece. Rome did so because it was a greater empire. Antiochus did not grow or expand his dominions and his domains. He temporarily conquered Egypt, but when the Romans sided with Ptolemy, he resigned. The little horn had to be greater than the Greek Empire. Another point is that the little horn was going to exalt itself against the Prince of Hosts and rise up against the Prince of Princes, Jesus Christ. Antiochus died 164 years before Jesus was born, but the Roman beast did rise up against Christ, crucifying him in the first phase as the Roman Empire and putting itself in its place in the second phase as papal Rome. Jesus applied the little horn in its abomination of desolation phase to the future. Daniel 9:25. There are many reasons, but these are a few. Nero was not the Antichrist either, simply because the little horn of Daniel 7 and 8 is the same identity. That the Church of Rome has shed more innocent blood than any other institution has ever existed among mankind will be questioned by no Protestant who has a competent knowledge of history. Many have forgotten the atrocities that the Church of Rome has committed. The great Protestant reformers knew that the Antichrist was a church called the Universal Church. It was the Roman Empire that crucified Christ, and it was Rome in religious form that persecuted the followers of Christ. The Protestant reformers, they are called Protestants because they protested against the Catholic Church. They had this to say about the Antichrist. Personally, I declare that I owe the Pope no other obedience than that of the Antichrist. Martin Luther. The Pope with his prelates and clergy is the true great Antichrist. Flashes. The Jesuits say they are deeply offended and have taken my statements as an insult and blasphemy in branding the papacy as the Antichrist prophesied by Daniel, Paul, Peter, John, and even Christ. These quotes are only a few compared to other reformers who spoke of the Antichrist. There are many more, but I think you get my point. Let us return to the characteristics of the Antichrist that we mentioned. Did he exalt himself against the heavenly host and trample the stars? Let's first look at what the Bible refers to as stars. Daniel writes about this in his next chapters in Daniel 12:3. Those who are wise shall shine like brightness of the firmament, and those who turn many to righteousness, like the stars forever and ever. The stars, or the host of heaven, are symbolic of the children of God in this verse. The stars are the host of heaven that the little horn cast to the ground and trampled are the saints that he tortured and persecuted during the Inquisition. Daniel 7 also speaks in this verse 7, when it says that this horn made war against the saints and overcame them, and he shall wear out the saints of the Most High. Did he exalt himself against the Prince of Hosts? Well, first, who is the Prince of Hosts? It is our Lord Christ Jesus. How do I know this? Revelation 19:16 calls Jesus King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Same thing in 17:14. It says he is Lord of Lords and King of Kings. In Daniel 9:25, Daniel calls Jesus the Messiah Prince. Isaiah says the following about Christ: the government will be upon his shoulder, and his name will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Many names are attributed to Christ. That is why the Prince of Hosts is a reference to Christ. Now, how did the papacy set itself against Christ? Let's look at the word antichrist. Antichrist has two meanings. It means against Christ and in the place of Christ. The word anti in Greek means against and in place of. The Vatican set itself in place of Christ, but in reality it is against him. Only Christ can forgive sins and has the authority to make himself God. But the papacy claims to forgive sins and pretends to be God on earth. We have already seen this in Daniel 7 video. By doing this, the Vatican is setting itself against Christ and taking his place. So yes, he exalted himself against Christ, the Prince of Hosts. Now, what about the third temple? Aren't the plans for building the third temple signs that the Antichrist is about to come? The third temple is a clear sign that the Antichrist is about to come, right? Or could it be Elon Musk or Donald Trump? Or is it a celebrity or Bill Gates? What about the other characteristics I mentioned? Well, we'll see that in the next video. God bless.